So one of the important arguments for legitimizing the code was the hadith. And usually, you will find that, we have the hadith. Hadith is something unique. We have the isnads, we have the chains of transmissions. It's very unique to the Islam. But the term hadith corresponds to the term chresis, the Byzantine term, which alongside the synonymous term logos, it's not necessarily some sort of a divine part of the Trinity, is frequently used in the Christian text to refer to the sayings of the church fathers. So church fathers' sayings are often rendered by this term chresis and logos, which is identical to the term hadith. The Greek term taxis became the central term in the Christian system of succession, and it is the predecessor of the Arabic analogous term isnad. And isnad means the chain of transmission. It's the part of this hadith. What is the hadith? It's the text of the saying of the prophet, and this is the second part of the hadith. But the first part of the hadith is the chain of the transmission. This particular person take this from that, and this is like a broken telephone. So you have the similar idea already in the Byzantine Christianity.
I'm here with Gnostic Quran. This is Brave New History. Thank you so much for coming.
Always, it's always a pleasure to be here, like in old good times, I guess. But today we wanted to discuss one of my recent videos about the Eastern Orthodoxy, rather Byzantine Orthodoxy, because, well, at the time of the influence of this school on Islam, there wasn't schism yet between the Roman Catholicism, like the Great Schism. But I think there is a strong theological correlation between what we know as the Eastern Orthodoxy and traditional Islam, which is often associated with the Ash'ari school of theology. Ash'ari Aqidah, as it's often used to be today. And well, there's of course different claimants for this orthodoxy. Obviously, 12 Shia thinks that they are orthodoxy. But what is important that before the establishment of this Ash'ari school, there were biggest school, which was actually the first defined orthodoxy of Islam with their own belief system, let's call it like that. Like, if you believe that, you are part of the team. If you don't believe, kafir zindiq. So, and they believed, or at least their formation is tightly correlated to the processes which was happening in the East. In the East, I mean not the East in the general sense, in the Eastern Byzantine Empire. So, and it's very common to hear that apologists, especially Salafis, are trying to portray Islam as sort of a unique way. Well, maybe indeed some theological concepts are distinctly Islamic. The idea of the divine book as sort of a revelation, as Akashic record, even though you can find it in some Gnosticism, in Mandaeanism, but well, it was popularized by Muslims, right? That's why it's distinctly Islamic. Well, I myself, we're skeptical about this claim of uniqueness in a general sense. And I myself often use the term Abbasid religion. The term is not mine, by the way. It was popularized by a famous Syrian philosopher who already passed away, Muhammad Shahrur, and he was a very famous in Arabic-speaking world, and he was the first to use to this kind of a term, Dinul Abbasi, the Abbasid religion. What he meant by that the modern day Islam, what we know as Islam in a general sense, what you probably know as Islam, as the Westerner, is pretty much in depth to the Abbasids, to the Abbasid codification project, what is called. And well, my research is mostly based on the book entitled Codification of Islamic Law, Harun al-Rashid Revolution or Reformation. It's a very good book because it shows the intertextual parallels between specific Christian terminology, which was in use back at the day, and the Muslim one, which became the monumental for the whole idea of the Orthodoxy, idea of the fiqh, Islamic law, and so on. So, and religion itself is the main of the law, and it's not controversial to say about Christianity. There were Christian courts in the medieval times. There were even in the times of the Renaissance. The idea of the secular court is a fairly recent one, with the help of Protestant Reformation and then the period of Renaissance. But yeah, I think it's fair to say that if we are dealing with a religion, we are first and foremost dealing with the law, with the specific restrictions which define who are part of this religious community, specific law, nomos, as in Greek, and who are out of the boundaries of this community, who are heretics, who are koferot, as it's in Hebrew, and it's even today used in Judaism, who are heretics, and who are kafirs, who are heretics in the terms of Islam.
It's interesting, like the borrowing from Hebrew, kufarut.
Yeah, kafirot.
Yeah, it kind of means something different, doesn't it? Heretic versus non-believer.
Non-disbeliever in what was taken in Islam, but still it's the same kind of pattern. I think it just generally reflects this one of the semantic definition of this root, because root itself is polysemantic, but one of the definition you can find is the rejection, denial, and that type of thing you will find in the Peshitta, in the Syriac, not only New Testament, but Old Testament, like Syriac Bible. But the root fairly polysemantic. Yom Kippur, for example, the Day of Atonement, this Kippur, stemming from the same root. And kafara literally means to cover something, with something. But yeah, and when we're dealing with the law, we are dealing with some personalities who codifies the law, some authority. And of course, when we're dealing with Islam, the person, the most important person who attempted to create such regulations, such codification was, of course, not Prophet Muhammad, but Harun al-Rashid, the fifth Abbasid caliph. And this is important personality from my perspective, because textual evidence for the Muslim law and for the Hadith, which is the part of the whole project, are coming from this particular period of reign of Harun al-Rashid. That first we hear about the founders of the Islamic fiqh, like Hanafis, Malikis, they all working for the same authority. And at the same time, you see this development of the early Muslim Orthodoxy. And that's why you have this controversial stance whether the Muhammad is the real historical figure, or maybe it's just a reference to Jesus as it was taken by more radical critical scholars like Patricia Krohn at Luxembourg, or Günther Lühling. Why? Because there is sort of a creation of history of Muhammad during this period of time, what we know about the Muhammad himself, about his conquest, his biography, his wives, his children. It's all stemming from the same time period. So Harun al-Rashid, and I think it's also important to say about Yahya al-Barmaki. And al-Barmaki means belonging to the Barmakit family. Barmakit family itself there'll be speculation who were theirs. Some scholars suggest that it was a Buddhist dynastic family. So it's very interesting, right? This kind of a already existing Buddhist trend in the Abbasid time. And I personally see a lot of this connection in the Hadith literature. There's sort of a weird influx of Buddhist traditions, or at least strong parallels between the Hadith and Buddhist scripture. And Harun al-Rashid himself grew in this Barmakit family, let's call it. His father figure was from this family. His best friend, this Yahya Khalid al-Barmaki, was from this family. But later on, there is also a famous event in the Muslim historiography called the Nakbatul Baramika, the fall of the Barmakids, when the Harun al-Rashid started to eliminating every member of Barmakid family, destroying them, slaughtering, basically massacring this family. And this also portrayed tragically in the Muslim sources because this Yahya was basically his brother. And I mean, not the real brother, but this event, even as far as I know, are sort of reiterated in the famous tales written in the Abbasid time, 1001 Night. So, yeah, numerous studies have proposed that Islam originated in the cultural melting pot. And many of the studies are mostly Western scholarship. And but what I see, there is a tendency to downplay the non-Islamic influences as incidental, and I don't think that's a true statement. I think most of this incidents can be explained by the direct influence of surrounding religious landscape, whether it's Jewish, Zoroastrian, or Christian, in our case, Byzantine Christian. Muslim jurists exhibited a great tendency towards eclecticism, so many of the terminology itself would be borrowed from either Zoroastrianism, Judaism, and mainly from the Byzantine Christianity. And this resulted in impressive achievements. The first legalistic school of the Muslim Ummah, or Sunni Orthodoxy, Hanafis, was important into developing this first monumental work called Al-Mabsut. Al-Mabsut was written by Shaybani. Shaybani is the student of Abu Hanifa, the founder of the Hanafi legalistic school. And there is a heated debate nowadays whether the Shaybani was really honestly representing the original thought of the Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa usually associated with the Hadith criticism. He was called the orphan of Hadith. Why is that? Because many of the Hadith tradition he just straight away rejected, which was blasphemous for more traditionally lenient school like the Hanbalis. And this work in particular, Mabsut, was like important step of codification, and many of the terminology we would discuss later on are from this particular book. Given the context of the many theological disputes that have arisen in Islamic milieu, in Sunni milieu, let's call it Abbasid milieu, which was a main tool to sharpen the Islamic law. These disputes didn't arise in a pure vacuum. There were dense cultural, religious, and political connection between Islam and Byzantine Christianity. Many of the Sunni converts, the great ones, they were actually ex-Christians, so wasn't like a recent phenomenon when you have like popular videos on YouTube with what is this Muslim reverts. There's a specific term for that. Originally, all people are Muslims, so they are not converts; they're reverts. They're just reverting back to this pristine state. Yeah. Due to the profound interconnectedness of these two cultures, Byzantium and the Abbasid Caliphate, it would be inappropriate to treat them as distinct entities. There was like who gonna be the main trade partner for the Abbasids? Europe, the Byzantium. It's fairly the same as today, right? Who's the main partner for the Turks, for the Turkish government? Europe. It's nothing controversial, just geographically determined, to be honest. Contrary to popular belief, the system wasn't developed by this independent religious scholars who serve as role models in the Muslim tradition, like Abu Hanifa or Rahmatullahi alayhi. Like every time you mention some of the scholars, you need to add some honorifics. Rahmatullahi alayhi, may the rahmah of God, the mercy of God be upon him, basically. And so on. But rather it was codified in Baghdad on the behalf of the state, and Baghdad was the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate already during the time of the Harun al-Rashid. Baghdad previously was Ctesiphon. At least the town itself was founded in vicinity of Seleucia Ctesiphon, the capital of the Sasanian Empire. Sasanian, how's it termed? Yeah, let's call it empire, Mamlakat, the kingdom. And on behalf of the state, as imperial law, and this imperial law was modeled after the famous Corpus Juris of the Justinian, a notable Roman emperor from the 6th century. And to be honest, probably without this person, there would be no Byzantium after the 6th century. It was important to gather parts of the empire which were lost previously to the Germans, to the Visigoths, who were possessing different type of Christology. They were Arians, and I myself think that's why Nicene Creed itself is anti-Arian. Well, you can easily explain it from political perspective, because Arian tribes were main or chief enemies for the Byzantines, and you must have some different theological unit from them in order to distinguish your own borders. And back at the day, religion was deeply connected to the law. And you can't imagine religion without the law as it's maybe today, when we have separation of church and state. Yeah, Corpus Juris of Justinian. And Justinian was also known for his draconian policies. During Justinian reign, the persecution of non-Orthodox entities were started, or it was like the demarcation line when the things got wrong, to be honest. You have a persecution of Jews, you have a persecution of Samaritans, you have a persecution of Manichaeans, you have a persecution of Gnostics. Obviously, why? Because from their theological point of view, it's seen that they possess some different ethos, some different ethical standards, and that's obviously couldn't be resolved without the brute force, because ethics are the basis and foundation for the law. And many of the Byzantine, newly introduced law by Byzantine authorities weren't that greeted well by this what I mentioned, by the Jews, Samaritans, and Manichaeans. During the first half of the 7th century, the military failures caused by the newly founded political enemy, let's call it like that, of Byzantine Arabs, when they got their own pieces of land in the Middle East. That's quite controversial to say whether the Arabic conquest was such gigantic and titanic as it is later on described in the Sunni sources. I myself very skeptical about the idea that Arabs conquered North Africa, Caucasus, eastern parts of Iran. I think that's kind of stuff a little bit exaggerated. Maybe there was some local authorities, but nothing more than that. Yeah, and that caused a major crisis when the Byzantine lost its control of Holy Land, of the Mediterranean Sea, of the Mediterranean shore in the Middle East. And many Byzantines interpret this event as divine punishment. As always, when you have some great calamities, there's always going to be some messianic movement who're going to say, well, that's the day of judgment, the Jesus is coming. And in attempt to gain support from the Monophysites, who represented the Christian majority on these lands, especially in Arabia, I think that most of the Arabia was already Christianized before Islam, and it is confirmed by the modern research done by Ahmad al-Jalad. He's the archaeologist who works in this field, and it seems like at least already at the 5th century, we see that most of the Arabia are already Christian, and probably Monophysite Christian, due to the influence of Ethiopian Aksumite kingdom, which was sort of a center of Monophysite Christology. It wouldn't be surprising, because monophysitic theology itself possessed the idea that Jesus itself is a fully divine, and out of that you can easily derive the Docetist Christology, because, well, he wasn't crucified, because, well, the spirit cannot be crucified. It's just divine being. And fairly enough, it's just development of this original originistically inclined Christianity of Alexandrian school. And Alexandria school was always in a beef with the Antiochian school. So many Byzantines strongly upheld the principle of reward and punishment. And Heraclius, the caliph, the famous caliph who was the major political ruler during the Byzantine Sasanian Wars, after losing the territories, he made a theological concession, which proved to be a mistake, when he tried to introduce this monophysitic Christology in the Byzantine domain, which was inclined towards diathletic Christology, where Jesus possesses both human and divine natures. Many Byzantines strongly upheld to this principle, which stems from this diathletism, reward and punishment, free will, like sort of a libertine theology, contrary to the more deterministically inclined Monophysites. And its epitome itself would be Manichaeanism, very strictly deterministic model, where the body itself governed by different entities, whether it's Ionic divinity or archontic demons who control the body, but Aeons control the soul and spirit. So diatheletism, that sparked a political theological conflict with this idea of Heraclius to somehow introduce monophysitism. This itself resulted in the Maximus Confessor, and Maximus Confessor is one of the major church father in the 7 centuries for both Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And as far as I know, he is the last of the father which is venerated by both of the churches. So next father is going to be like sort of already separation between what we know as the Western and Eastern Christianity. Even with John of Damascus, it's a good indication that he's only venerated in the Eastern Orthodoxy. So Maximus Confessor, he leads the oppositional diatheletic movement to this new Heraclius reform. This movement is characterized by extreme form of traditionalism, which ultimately laid the foundation of what we know as the Eastern Orthodoxy. That's why he's the last one among the church fathers to be venerated by both West and East, and Islam. Islam in its Sunni sense. Obviously, I distinguish from that Ismailis. I just skip them. Like maybe it's unjustified. Of course, there was the Fatimid Caliph. There was a great prolific Ismaili writers. But today, when we are dealing with Islam, we are dealing with mostly with a Sunni tradition. Majority of the Muslims on the planet are Sunnis. Towards the end of the 7th century, this monothelitic conflict was at its peak, culminating in several ecumenical councils. And this conflict spread out to Islam, resulting to the emergence of the first theological schools, Qadariya, which would be the Islamic equivalent of diatheletism. They were named like that, Qadariya, from Arabic verb qadar, or noun qadar, meaning the power, or qudra, which is also used, the ability to possess or have independent action. So it's the school which defends the liberty and free will of the human being. That would be equivalent of the athletic trend in the Byzantine domain. The opposition to that would be the Murji'a, which represents the monothelitism. They were more inclined to the deterministic models. They were also called the Jahmiya in the Muslim chronicles. And Imam Abu Hanifa was probably part of this movement, Murji'a. He's often slandered as the Murji'a by the Hanbali writers. Hanbalis hated them. If you look at some maybe controversial sources, but there is a lot of narrations who regard Abu Hanifa as a kafir, as a non-believer. Like the famous hadith when somebody asked the Hanbali authority, I don't remember the name of which, but they asked, what do you think about the death of the Abu Hanifa? And he answered, thank God this kafir died. Like almost like that. It's a very negative attitude. And as the monothelitic conflict reached its peak in the late 7th century, it eventually gave way to the iconoclastic conflict. It's the conflict which arose in Byzantium about the veneration of icons, whether it's prohibited or not. And there was several Byzantine kings, right? Byzantine rulers who were prohibiting production of the icons. So there was history there was a part of the history in Christianity where there was a strong resentment towards this icons. It's very interesting. Why? Because it aligns to what is happening in the Muslim domain. So the diathylitics had the image cult as the central element. That's why diathyllitism won. We can witness it in Eastern Orthodoxy. They venerate the icons, right? And Maximus Maximus Confessor was the part of this movement. So they had this belief system exactly like the Qadaris have, Qadariya. But the question arose about, of course, the idea of uncreatedness of God or of the image of God. So God, the immaterial creator, is opposed to the material created image. In the case of Christianity, it is the icons. In the case of Islam, it is the Quran, image of God. So the Byzantine term used in the Christianity was ktisma, which means literally creation. And this term forms essential part of the one of the iconoclastic emperors, Constantine V. Although Christians never claimed that all images to be uncreated, there was a clear tendency to regard the images as something uncreated. Some images were explicitly described as ahiropitos, not made by the human hands. In the Islam term was rendered into the Arabic khalq, creation. Of course, I myself disagree that the khalq means creation in the Quran itself. I already point out several times that's most probably emanationist position, which is defended by the term khalq means to separate, to separate between two items. But in Abbasid times already it was pretty much understood as the ex nihilo, sort of a creation. So khalq, it is connected to this term ktisma. And it is closely connected to the idea of the divine unity in the Muslim theological works, to the Tawheed, what is called, which is like you have this recent debates like Tawheed versus the Trinity. But ultimately, I think it's kind of a similar idea. That Tawheed itself as a term, if we do translate it literally, it means to unify something. So this position was defended by the Orthodoxy, whether it's Mu'tazila and later Asharis, who are developed through this early proto-Orthodoxy, let's call it like that. The idea that the God possesses the attributes and that the attributes are unified with the God essence. That would be the definition of Tawheed, and not that God is one. So there is the plurality in God. Maybe it's not in the terms of classic Christian understanding, the God, Son, and the Holy Spirit, where the triad is important, but it's much more than that, 99 attributes, right? So the Mu'tazila made a clear distinction between eternal and immaterial God and the material medium. In the case of Islam, instead of the icons, it's the Quran. The term khalq was opposed to the term ghair makhluk, uncreated, which in terms correspond to the aforementioned term ahiropitos, not created by the human hands, indicating the divine character of the medium, the Quran. The only difference is the faculty of the sense that is responsible for the reception of this mediator. Because in Christianity, you receive this mediator through your eyes, through the faculty of the sight, whilst the hearing. That's why you have this highly developed tajweed tradition of the recitation of the Quran. Recitation became important. But still, it's the physical medium. It's not something uncreated. And the Muslim code was largely based both in structure and content on the Roman law. The major would be Digest Summa of the Anonymous, that's the Byzantine writer. and Glosse of Enantiophanes, also Byzantine writer in this particular field. Codification was done in a humanistic climate. That's fascinating because usually we associate this authoritarian regime with a very draconian type of policies towards the science, but we can say that pretty much the golden age of Islam was due to the authoritarianism, not other way around. But this authoritarianism was obviously made some emendation in theology, which is quite different from the earlier stages of Islam. So, and that coincides, by the way, this humanistic climate with the Carolingian humanism, which is often described by the historians as the first European Renaissance in the 8th century, where much of the Byzantine tradition started being spread out in the West. The architecture, the legalistic code, the exegetical tradition, all of that was adopted by this Arian state in the West. And then most of the West back at the day was Arian. The Visigoths were still Arians, predominantly Spain, Germany, France. It was all Arian lands. And that's why many scholars suggest that Islam came to the Spain with a greater hands because of the similar theological motives. So one of the important arguments for legitimizing the code was the Hadith. And usually, you will find that, we have the Hadith. Hadith is something unique. We have the isnads, we have the chains of transmissions. It's very unique to the Islam. But the term Hadith corresponds to the term chresis, the Byzantine term, which alongside the synonymous term logos, it's not necessarily some sort of a divine part of the Trinity, is frequently used in the Christian text to refer to the sayings of the church fathers. So church fathers' sayings are often rendered by this term chresis and logos, which is identical to the term hadith. The Greek term taxis became the central term in the Christian system of succession, and it is the predecessor of the Arabic analogous term isnad. And isnad means the chain of transmission. It's the part of this hadith. What is the hadith? It's the text of the saying of the prophet, and this is the second part of the hadith. But the first part of the hadith is the chain of the transmission. This particular person take this from that, and this is like a broken telephone. So you have the similar idea already in the Byzantine Christianity. So this isnad system was probably constructed on the pattern of the bishop lists, which contained in the diptychs. The very idea of the bishop succession was introduced long before the 8th century. For example, it was already discussed by Irenaeus, by the famous church writer in the 3rd century, and for him, succession was sort of a powerful weapon against the Gnostics, because Gnostics believe in their own succession, like secret teachings, which taught by the secret students of different apostles. That's why, for example, Basilides based his teaching on the lost teaching of the apostle Matthew through the disciple Glaucius or Glacius of the apostle Paul. Valentinians cited a Theodas, another student of Paul, as well the apostle John as the progenitor. Marcion himself referred to the secret teachings of Paul, that Paul was a main apostle. So it was the whole system was to combat basically the Gnostics and to say no, only through the Peter. Peter is the main successor in this chain of transmission of bishops. and that was transported to the Muslim system. But it wasn't novatory because Muslims are combine these two different separate theological construct together. But it's not novel and unique anyhow. Even the Hadith itself, maybe without the bishop list, you can see already in Manichaean literature. There is the famous Manichaean catalog of sayings of the Mani, which is called Kefalaya. Ultimately, it's the Hadith book, sayings of Mani. Another point of agreement between Eastern Orthodoxy and Islam is the idea of consensus, ijma', what is called. That's why you have this, even in the title, it's sort of represented in the title of the school itself, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This Jama'ah ultimately refers to the sort of a consensus of important theologians who are taken as authoritative. And exactly the same you can see in Byzantine Christianity with the concept of consensus patrum, which in itself refer to the consensus of the church fathers. It's pretty much rejected in the Western Christianity. They do not believe in that. What they do believe is the specific thomos, and thomos is the ethical code for the devout Catholic. So you need to follow this law to be a Catholic. But the thomos itself is defined by the ecumenical council, by the Pope himself. So that's why after the Vatican II, they revised this Byzantine code or belief system. That's rejected by the Eastern Orthodoxy. They believe that there must be some sort of a consensus of the early church fathers. And fairly enough, that's the same problem which Muslims face when this concept is critiqued. There was a debate of the Russian Orthodox priest with a kind of a more Protestant inclined, like a theologian and scholar, almost 5 years ago, as far as I remember. There was a famous debate on the consensus patrum in the Byzantine Christianity. The problem, of course, there's no consensus upon the consensus. So what's the problem? Well, for the different persons, there is a different kind of numbers of this church father which you're taken as a granted. And of course, there were no consensus in terms of some theological major themes, I would suggest. For example, tripartite or dipartite anthropology. Some church fathers of the Eastern Orthodoxy, they held almost Alexandrian belief system that the anthropos, the human being, consists of the three parts: the soul, spirit, and the flesh or body, whilst others were inclined into more dualistic dichotomy, body and soul. And that's the major, I think, theological point, because from that you can derive other different theological position. But that's basically the same problem and the same idea conveyed. And today you see sort of a similar critique happening in the Muslim world, where this concept of ijma being highly critiqued and doubted. So this is major point of agreement. Diverse spread of the oral traditions during the Abbasid period can be easily explained by the similar processes in Byzantium. At the end of the 8th century, the iconophiles introduced the new element into traditionalism, and iconophiles again represent diaphyletic part of the Christianity. So they emphasized the idea that this oral tradition were no longer traced back to the church fathers, but to Jesus himself. Some of the iconophiles were defending that, and it's exactly mirrored in Islam, where the Shafi'i, founder of one of the 4 major Islamic legal schools, Shafi'ism, which is still with us today, like pretty much almost major part of the Southeast Asian Muslim countries, they do follow the Shafi'i fiqh, Shafi'i Islamic law. So he introduced a similar idea that Sunnah is no longer identified with the traditions of particular community, whereas this like Meccan community, Kufan community, who had their own tradition representing the specific customs of this cities, Meccan or Kufa, but it's traced directly to the Muhammad. So now Muhammad is the sole authority. Reinstatement of iconoclasm in the early 9th century in the Byzantine domain resulted in the flight of the numerous iconophiles into the caliphate. So they were fleeing from Byzantium to the lands where they were not persecuted. And many of the converted Christians to Islam were referred as Nawabit, neophytes, or also can be like literally translated as some sort of a spruce. They constituted the foundations of the traditional opposition in Baghdad. And among the iconophile refugees was Ibn Kulab, who established the Kulabiyya. Kulabiyya was a sort of a moderate orthodoxy, which abandoned these iconophilic tendencies in Islam itself, where the Quran is deemed to be a creation of God. So they believe that Quran is uncreated. And this Ibn Kulab is the predecessor of what we know as Muslim Orthodoxy. And you often see that the Salafis pinpoint that fact that they refuse to, for example, name the Asharis, the major bulk of traditional orthodoxy of the Sunni tradition, as the Asharis. They just call them Kulabis, sort of a semi-Christians or something like that. But this sort of iconoclastic movement within the realm of caliphate wasn't lasted long, and this iconoclasm was trampled down later on by this Ashari orthodoxy in the middle of the 9th century. So there was a period where first Inquisition was initiated by several Abbasid caliphs who were iconoclasts. They didn't like the idea that Quran is uncreated because it shows the direct sort of parallel with the Byzantine Christology, right? What is the difference between in that case, between the Islam and Christianity? It's not the big difference. What we have this higher God, God the Father. In our case, in the Muslim structure, it would be Allah. We have the Holy Spirit, Kalimatullah or Ruhul Qudus. Kalimatullah is often identified either with Jesus in the text of the Quran or with the Quran itself. So in our case, we have the same incarnationist theology, which was very problematic, and Mu'tazili understood that, well, no, we can't allow that. But ironically, this position was later abandoned, and what we have today as the Ash'ari theology is pretty much, from my perspective, identical to what we have in Christianity. So the Quran is the word of God incarnated, in our case, in book, in a specific language of the people. But in Christianity, word of God incarnated in the figure of Jesus Christ himself. So difference is the medium. Again, in terms of Christianity, the medium is the Jesus of Nazareth. Whether it's his historical person or not is another matter of debate, but let's assume he's a historical person. Jesus of Nazareth is the incarnation of this Ruhul Qudus. But in case of Islam, incarnation of Ruhul Qudus is the Quran. And even the entire name of Islamic Orthodoxy, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is usually translated as the people of the Sunnah and community or congregation rather, can be represented by the purely Greek Orthodox formula, Katholike kai Apostolike Ecclesia. meaning exactly almost the same thing. The people of this Catholic, of the sort of a tradition, established tradition, Sunna, kai apostolic, wal Jama'ah in that case would be identical part. And Islamic Orthodoxy not only made the uncreatedness of the Quran its central dogma, it's also usurped this legal system which was produced before them by the imperialistic regimes. Because you won't find something like that in the Muslim books. They deny that fact that there was a sort of a law before the Sunni law. They pretty much doesn't like discuss Mu'tazila school because it's very pain in one place to discuss this guy, because they were basically the first Orthodoxy, and they held somewhat different beliefs. And if you are propose this idea, well, what the heck? It doesn't mean that there were any sort of a agreement upon the unified Orthodox dogma. There were rivalry, Christological or Mohammedological schools, which were very antagonistic to each other. And this is early 8th century. The big enigma, what was before that time, before the Abbasids, what the Umayyads possessed as their Orthodox teaching. That's the big question, because many of the, Umayyads documents or documents written in Umayyad times, inscriptions, they bear crosses on the inscriptions. Why on earth is that? So yeah, subsequently all ties between traditional Islam and Byzantine were in every way obscured by the later caliphates, namely, I think, the Ayyubid Caliphate and successor of the Ayyubid Caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate, Ottoman Empire. And for them, it was obviously why they wanted to obscure connections between Islam, traditional Islam, and Orthodoxy. Well, because Orthodoxy was the major political enemy for them. The siege of Constantinople, what else do you need? You need sort of a theological disagreements with the Eastern Orthodoxy in order to show that we are different. Even at the time of the famous Eastern Orthodox writer Saint Gregory Palamas, and he is a sort of a representative of modern day traditional understanding of Christology and of God himself in Eastern Orthodoxy. He actually reports interesting facts that the Turks back in the day, and this is the 13th century, they weren't that against the idea that Jesus is the Son of God. So I think this hermeneutics, where Jesus seen as a pure creation, almost deistic ideas, they were established during the Ottoman times in order to generate their own orthodoxy, and pretty much most of what we know of Islam are stemming from Abbasid time, but through intermediary of the Ottomans, through their hands, through their manuscripts, which of course raises the question of some redaction procedures which were done and so forth. But it's pretty much what I wanted to express today about the connection between Sunni Orthodoxy and Eastern Orthodoxy.
Very good. In Eastern Orthodoxy, the son is subordinate to the father. It doesn't seem that far off from Islam, or like you could see like an early form of Islam where there wasn't the same orthodoxy there is now, where they'd be more amenable, like you said, to the idea of Jesus as the Son of God, or a higher Christology.
But even sort of a general Muslim theology, obviously the Quran is itself is a subordinated to the god. There is a different type of maybe disagreements between between the Sunni part of Islam and Ismailis, Shia Ismailis, where they do believe that the God is this Quran is represented by what is called divine tablet, Akashic record, the Lawhul Mahfuz. And they believe that this tablet is created rather than being uncreated as it is in the Sunni Orthodox stance. Well, this tablet it's just basically the speech of God, so it's definitely not in disagreement with a higher God. So there is sort of a volition of God, which is just it's not taken, but which was actualized by this more lower middle management deity by the name of this divine tablet. But still, it's the same Christology ultimately. What is the disagreement is the nature of incarnation, I guess. It's not the Jesus, it's this Arabic book became the word became flesh, like in a John. Because even the term for the flesh in Greek is very broader, sarcoma. It doesn't necessarily refer to the body. It generally was used to describe anything in the lower realm. Lower realm is often identified with this term.
So interesting. Yeah, I've not heard that in terms of Greek just meant in the flesh. It just meant anything in the lower realm.
Yeah.
That like, let's say we're in Christianity and we're talking about the various levels of heaven. Would they believe that like the angels had bodies, as far as you know?
Yeah. They I mean,
Were they?
I think
But would
the
they be made
majority.
of flesh? Or you wonder?
I don't remember that. That's
Yeah,
just a tough question for me, I guess.
yeah.
But it's a good question to testify this claim, whether it's true or not. But I think they were using different term for that. But even the whole idea of the incarnation, it's basically the same root as reincarnation, right? That they are being kind of reborn again in the lower domains. But I don't know. What is interesting that some terms are similar in that case.
Yeah. So here, maybe before we go, let's hit up some questions or comments. So anybody watching, you can put in a comment. But we have two from Daniel Hopkins. Let's see. The Islamic prophet Dul el Kafil has been identified with the Buddha. I knew Daniel would bring up Buddhism. I just had this premonition. The meaning of Dul el Kafil is the man from Kafil, and Kafil is the Arabic pronunciation of Kapilafastu.
Yeah, there was a suggestion by some scholars, especially modernist one in Pakistan. They would bring up this kind of identification. Dhul-Kifl. Well, it can be used like that. Dhul-Kifl is the sort of a possessor of Kifl. Because though it doesn't necessarily mean a man, it's just a sort of affiliation with a preceding word like Zulkarnain, the possessor of the two Karnain, Qarns, whether it's really horns or something different, because the word itself is very polysemantic in the Semitic languages. Yeah, but I heard that some scholars identify it with a Joseph, with supposedly the husband of Mary, right? Because Dhul Kifl, and if you take kafala as an Arabic word, kafala means, as far as now, orphanage or something like that. So it would be possessor of orphanage, that he taking the Mary, or taking the Jesus as his own son. I don't remember exactly, but I myself tried to find anything about Buddha, couldn't find anything, any possible reference. There is the famous verse in the Quran which starts like by the fig tree, something like that, and many people connect that. Why on earth Quran would start to swear by the fig tree? Well, because fig tree was the tree under which Buddha gained its salvation, or attained nirvana. So there was some arguments towards that, but I myself skeptical.
No. And then let's see.
2001 Nights also includes Buddhist Jatakas fables. I didn't know.
I'm not familiar. Jatticus? I'm not familiar.
Well, I think it's a question about chicken and eggs, which who came first, this Jatakas or this Abbasid stories. But if there is such thing, I wouldn't be surprised, given the fact that there were Barmakids during the Abbasid times. It's literally Buddhist aristocracy.
All right, good deal. All right, do we want to leave it there?
Yeah, let's leave it there. Maybe we'll discuss lunisolar calendar next time, but for now, I guess I pretty much expressed my personal research about connection between Byzantine Christianity and Muslim Orthodoxy, Ashri Theological School. For now, I guess.
All right, sounds good. And yeah, thank you everybody for watching, and thank you Gnostic Quran. It's interesting as usual. And have an awesome day.
Bye.